good? Okay, thank you. All right, good afternoon again. My name is Courtney Richardson. I serve as the president of the Philadelphia Barristers Association Philadelphia. I'm very excited to join our two candidates for district attorney in the city and county of Philadelphia. We have Judge Patrick Dugan and we have Mr. Larry Krasner. So, gentlemen, to get started, I'm going to ask for a 3-minute introduction, and then we will go into a conversation about the history of the District Attorney's Office, the current state of the District Attorney's Office, and criminal justice in Pennsylvania, and then your thoughts on moving forward. Okay. Mr. Dugan, by alphabetical order, I ask that you go first.
Good afternoon. Am I on? Is the mic on? No? I'll say that's probably a yes. Can you hear me up there? No. Do you want to use mine? Hello? Please stop the timer. Judge, you want to use mine? All right. So, good afternoon. I'm Judge Pat Dugan. Don't judge a book by its cover. When you look at me, I probably look like a mean detective coming in. I am an old paratrooper, though, but I have compassion and empathy, and I can tell you that. That is what my resume says for 17 years on the bench. Pat Dugan, lifelong Philadelphian, born in Fairmount, raised in Frankfurt, right down the street from the Whitehall Projects, under the L. Rode the 15 trolley car to go to school. Army veteran. Yeah, for adventure, but it was also economic. I was making $4.25 an hour working in a metal fabrication shop, and I worked with an old guy named Steve Stavis, who was an 82nd Airborne veteran, and he convinced me, what the heck were we doing working in a place like that? So for adventure, but also an economic opportunity, I joined the Army, much like many of us Philadelphians have done. My mother's my hero, absolutely is. God bless her. I could talk about her for 20 minutes, but I only have 3 minutes to introduce myself. I understand that. I have 6 children, 12 grandchildren, and the 13th is on its way. She went into, her water broke last night. We're still waiting for the results of that. So I stepped off the bench after 17 years. I resigned in December to run because I wasn't satisfied with what I saw. I saw over a 70% withdrawal rate at times in court. I saw a couple Board of Ethics violations for the last 2 district attorneys' race. And my question to Mr. Krasner's staff is, who's paying you this year? Because in 2017 and 2021, the Board of Ethics found that Real Justice PAC out of San Francisco paid for his staff. A clear violation. It's just toothless. They just fine money. We need to have ethics in the district attorney's office. A judge recently ordered, front page Inquirer, every district attorney to take ethics class. Every single district attorney must take ethics class. That is unheard of. Not only did that judge order that, lack of candor, a federal judge used the same expression about lack of candor on one of these cases that were overturned. The shining star of the Conviction Integrity Unit, Patricia Cummings, nationally respected, told her lawyers she was going to plead the 5th if she came to court. So what are we afraid of? The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Justice Brobson, said the DA's office takes the knee. Another judge used the word lack of candor. This seems to be a current theme. The process of criminal cases in court that I've seen has taken a back seat to what it was years ago. I'm not going back. I'm not going back in time, mass incarceration and that. Murder rate is down. Yes, it should be. But we're finally back down to the numbers before Mr. Krasner. It took a real spike in those 7 years while he's the DA. It went down this year because, in my opinion, the policies and strategies of the police department under the good leadership of Chief Bethel, Commissioner Bethel, and the mayor. But if you look at it, the murder rate before Larry got elected, we're getting back to down the rate. Is red mean I need to stop? I didn't run that red light. I apologize.
Shall I wait? Would you like me to go ahead or wait for a moment? What would you?
You can go ahead.
Okay,
You can
thank
go
you.
ahead. Can we please start the time?
Okay, thank you. You know, we'll get into a lot of the, frankly, inaccuracies that you just heard, but I guess we should probably start with this one. You just heard that we're back at the same levels where we. Those are not the statistics. We're 15% down. The number of homicides last year, 296. That was in 2017. It was the fourth lowest in the last 55 years. It was the third lowest in the last 40 years. Those are just facts. We don't get to make up facts. And the reality is it's not a one-year thing. We have not only been down for 4 consecutive years, but we have been down more quickly and more severely, and down is good when you're talking about homicide numbers, every year than the national average of big cities. This is the poorest of the 10 largest cities, and yet we are the locomotive on the train of improving public safety. We are way safer than we were, and yet we also had a pandemic, kind of didn't get mentioned, but we also had a pandemic during that 5-year period. We had the biggest national increase and the biggest national decrease in violent crime and gun violence during that period. So we'll get into some of those inaccuracies, but I want to talk to you about something else, because I think it's a special time, and I know who the sponsors are of this important event. Who do we hire? Well, here are the facts. Diversity in the office has increased in every single category, every one, over a period of 7 years. Let me give you one example. I made a decision years ago to travel around the country to recruit the best and the brightest. This microphone's fighting me, I apologize. And when I did that, I found myself going to every one of the 6 historically black law schools in the country, including Howard, where I have made some of the best hires of my career. One of them is a young woman named Angela Brennan, who we hired 6 years ago, went to Central High, African-American woman from Philly, came to the office, superstar, is now the youngest head of major trials in the history of the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, and she's just getting started, okay? So I know this is a difficult time. We have a president who takes Jackie Robinson off the website for the Department of Defense and then has to put him back on. You know, I know that that is where we are, but I want you to understand that I don't actually think there's anything DEI about going around the country, and I support diversity, I support equity, I support inclusion, and finding the most talented people you can find. And that's exactly what we have done, and that is exactly why this is an office that is frankly way better than the office I faced for 30 years, and it was 30 years that I spent as a criminal defense attorney and I spent as a civil rights lawyer for individuals. I'm sorry, I can't see that, my apologies. Okay, yellow. So, you know, we're gonna get an opportunity to say a lot more things here, but I want you to understand that the progress we have made in being much safer, which we are, much freer, which we are, than when we first came in, and all of that is documented by numbers, is also accompanied by a sense that the way we get there is with the most talent. And the way we get the most talent is by going around the country to recruit the best people. Many of them from Philly, by the way. When I recruited Angela, she'd been to Central High. She'd grown up in Philadelphia her whole life. When you bring them here and you bring the best, despite what you might have just heard, you get the best. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. So I do want to establish the rules of engagement as we have this conversation. The first thing is that in terms of responses to questions, you will have 2 minutes. You will receive a yellow when there is 30 seconds left, and then you will receive a red when it is time to stop. So no running red lights if we can avoid it. No Philly stops either at the stop sign.
Send me the ticket in the mail, I'll pay it. Sorry about that.
No problem. So, and if you have any questions, please feel free to have the conversation. We would like to keep it as informative as possible. So as I shared earlier, we were going to have a conversation about the history of the District Attorney's Office. So to start, Philadelphia has a history by its own admission of, quote, problematic past convictions for credible claims of actual innocence, wrongful convictions, and sentencing inequities. The biggest group negatively affected by these practices were Black men. Can you explain your position on the prevention and what will happen if it is discovered under your leadership? What will be your policy on reviewing and overturning these convictions in real time? I will start with Mr. Krasner, and then we'll go to Judge Dugan.
All right, thank you for the question. At this point, 7 years into our administration, Philadelphia is considered a national leader, if not the national leader in conviction integrity. We have overturned 45 convictions. Nearly every single one of those people was completely innocent of the charges, did decades in jail for things they never did, and they were nearly all black. That's the fact. Nearly all of them were black. Right off the top of my head, I can think of 2 who were not out of 45. It is sad, it is tragic, but the good news is there's about 45 people who never would have been out but for what we did. We studied how that happened, and the primary message was this. Police, sadly, hid stuff. Prosecutors, sadly, hid stuff, including prosecutors I fired. And I fired them coming in before I even had been in those files because I knew how they did things. There was a win at all cost culture in the district attorney's office when I was up against them for 30 consecutive years in court 4 to 5 days a week, doing felony cases, homicide cases, death penalty cases, and underage drinking cases. There was a win at all cost culture. They thought it was a sport. They didn't think it was about justice. They didn't think it was about truth. They didn't think it was about fact. Just to give you one example, one of the homicide cases we overturned, there were about 18, it was at least 15 witness statements. Prosecutor turned over 3. They were the 3 that helped him. Some of the other ones were, that defendant didn't do it. In fact, I'll tell you who did. That is the kind of stuff that was done routinely under that administration. So I'm extremely proud of the fact that last year we had 15 exonerations. It was 10% of all the exonerations in the United States coming out of one county in 1 year. I'm extremely proud of the mechanisms that we have set up, including a Brady czar and a database to make sure that we do not fall into the same terrible patterns.
Judge Dugan?
So the Conviction Integrity Unit is a great unit that should be expanded, but it also needs to be looked at and vetted a little bit better. The Patricia Cummings that I was talking about who headed this, she's the one who wouldn't come to court a couple weeks ago, and she said she was going to plead the Fifth. We have to make sure that these cases are vetted properly. Those judges that I was talking about, Judge Goldberg, Justice Bronson, Justice Doherty, Coyle, these judges are using the phrases lack of integrity. A judge recently said that Larry Krasner's office did the same thing he's accusing past DAs of, withholding evidence, not calling the victims up. There was one family, he was a minister and his wife, they were killed in cold blood. The infant daughter was left to die. They stole the crib, by the way. So fast forward years later, we're trying to get it overturned. Larry Krasner's in federal court, and that judge found that his office lacked integrity. You know why? One of the things they put in their motion that they had contacted this witness. Now she's a woman. Now she's grown up, but witnesses have a right to go to these hearings and say, "Judge, I agree. I disagree." They didn't even let this young lady know that. That's not fair. So I want to do conviction integrity. I don't want an innocent man or woman in jail. I want people who are put in jail with corruption. We need to figure out a way to get them out. But we need to make sure that now, as we're looking at them, we're doing it properly as well, with ethics. And I'd like the numbers of hires in the DAs released, how many stayed, how many left, because in 2019, 78 of these new DAs, God bless them, some of them are fantastic young people, 68 of them have left.
Thank you. Moving on to a lesser-known topic, the asset civil forfeiture. From 2002 to 2014, the City of Philadelphia's District Attorney's Office was partially funded by taking assets of the community as part of the civil forfeiture program. This program over this time period of 2002 to 2014 garnered $72 million, much of the loss, which actually caused a large wealth gap in the Black community based on this particular program. Can you share your thoughts about how was this an appropriate practice to fund the office? And is this practice still used, and what your opinion is on the practice overall? Judge Dugan, to go first, please.
Okay. Why is somebody calling me during this? I apologize. Let me turn it off. Sorry. Is it being used now? I don't believe it is being used much anymore. I know that part of those policies are pretty outrageous. You know, if you were unlucky enough to have somebody in your family dealing drugs and they did a buy out of your house, then you as a single mother or two parents trying to, you know, pay your mortgage, that they would come after your house like that. That's just outrageous. I would say that right now, one of the issues that I would look into about seizing assets, I'm not looking to fund the DA's office with it, but these folks that are riding around the streets in illegal dirt bikes, the ATVs that are basically riding up and down the streets and terrorizing people as they're walking down the street or in traffic jams. Sometimes they're stopping to beat some motorists up. I think that that's something we should look at, that we should enforce some of these seizure laws for that. But we have to be very careful when we're going to take property from citizens and then use it to fund the DA's office. It feels like one of those bad B-rated movies that 3 o'clock in the morning you turn on and the guy riding in the street, the sheriff pulls him over and he's got $10,000 in cash in his pocket that he's taken to give to his grandmother in the next state. Yet those sheriffs seize it, they take it, trumped up charges. The next thing you know, that small town sheriff's office has a brand new SUV at the expense of that motorist that was riding through. So we have to be careful about doing that.
Mr. Krasner?
Thank you. So just a side note, our attrition is lower than Seth Williams. You can have the numbers. And by the way, Deb Watson-Stokes, who was in my office for almost 35 years, that's attrition. She becomes a judge. We're saying that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. I hope that Angela Brennan goes on to be a city council person. You can call that attrition. I call that victory for people who are talented and should be advancing in good ways, but I'll be happy to release the numbers. Coming back to civil asset forfeiture, what they were actually doing is they were keeping what they kill. In other words, there was an incentivized attitude in the DA's office before I got there to go and take grandma's house because the grandkids sold weed out of the basement when she was at church. Because the more we get, the more we can spend. That ended with me. We settled a lawsuit against the DA's office that started before I got there. We do not fund anybody's salary off of civil asset forfeiture money. What we do with that money is microgrants. We have given out now almost $4 million to community-based organizations, nonprofits, 501c3s that do pro-youth, anti-crime work in the community. And it has been excellent prevention. Mighty Writers is a group that works with kids after school to help them write anything they want. Movie script, essay, rap lyric, book, whatever it is. They help them do it. They've been around forever. Well, they could use that money. So we've been giving out between $5,000 and $50,000 to these groups for years. You see what's happening with the crime numbers. This is part of it. When you fund prevention, when you give young people things that make them feel like they have a future, that excite them, that allow them to be mentored, then you don't have the crime in the first place. So I'm actually very proud of what we've been able to do with civil asset forfeiture. It does go on, but it does not go on to fund salaries in the DA's office. It goes on to return money to the communities it came out of, where criminal activity damaged them, to rebuild them.
Moving on to the current state of the district attorney's office, can we talk about prosecutorial discretion? Prosecutors have a great deal of discretion in deciding whether to bring charges and what charges to bring. How will you ensure that Black and brown defendants are not disproportionately charged with harsher crimes? Mr. Krasner.
We try to work with the limited amount of information that is immediately available when someone is arrested. There's been a real emphasis in this city on coming with charges or rejecting charges quickly, within 12 hours or so, within 18 hours or so. And we make real efforts to be very careful about that. There are certain things we're just not going to charge anymore. We are not going to ordinarily charge someone with possession, just possession, of marijuana for every reason you know. There used to be thousands of people, and no, they weren't getting locked up in white neighborhoods. That's the reality. They had plenty of weed, in white neighborhoods, but they weren't getting locked up because those neighborhoods were not policed. You know, there are a lot of other offenses that used to be charged all the time. Free speech activity that was nonviolent and didn't damage property used to get charged all the time. I'm not bringing that stuff. If Dr. King would do it, I ain't charging it. That's just how that goes. So we've placed a real emphasis on only bringing the charges that should be brought, the ones that have to do with crimes that actually affect people in bad ways, and we are seeing improvements. We've also come with sentencing policies that have reduced some of the racial disparities. But let's make no mistake, the criminal justice system has a lot of players. We're not perfect. It remains a racist system, and this is why my office has studied the racial disparate outcomes that occur in the system, identified where they are, and released a public report. And we're going to go back and do it again. I'll tell you one improvement we've seen because I think it is pertinent. We came with a policy that ordinarily we won't seek more than 3 years of probation or parole. Unless the law requires it, we won't do it. And we did that because we knew the science was that it usually doesn't help after that. It just makes things worse. Creates a bunch of tripwires, people get in trouble, go back to jail. Well, guess what? The disparate impact, the unfair impact towards black people reduced when we did that. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Because when a judge looked at a white defendant and a black defendant who had done the same thing, some of them in their gut, they just felt like the black defendant needed 5 years instead of 2 years. Well, when you start to cap that, maybe we're at least at the point where that judge, who may not even realize they're being racist, does 3 years instead of 2 years. It's getting better, and we're going to keep working on it because it's not right and it's not just.
Judge Dugan?
Yeah, the district attorney has a lot of discretion. In fact, he had an executive order in 2018 pretty much allowing anybody to go in and take whatever they want out of a store. The retail theft policy was an executive order from the district attorney's office. Much like those executive orders that come out of D.C. that we're all like shaking our head, how can he do this? How can he just usurp the mayor, the city council, the law that's on the books? And that's what happened with retail theft. Anything below $4.99 was now a ticket. Now, he's going to say that, yeah, it became a summary. You can go to jail for 90 days. I don't think anybody's ever going to jail for a retail theft for 90 days as a summary. It went from 7,000 offenses, incidents, and you know most retail thefts aren't reported. These are only ones that somebody sees you do it or the camera sees you do it. So there are more than 7,000. This was pre-Larry. It went up to 22,000 last year. 22,000 incidents. That's why these stores are leaving us. That's why you can't keep a store at 52nd Street or Kensington Avenue or Center City, Macy's, Wawa, etc. 70% of the cases at times in front of me were withdrawn. Do you realize that 700 out of 1,000 cases that are charged never really have a day in court? The most recent statistics are that 79% of carjackings don't really get a day in court. This doesn't make sense. Property crimes last year, 69% of them were withdrawn. This is prosecution discretion, and the prosecutor's the one who can say it. Those new DAs, one of them was hiding standing on a toilet. One went into the bathroom vomiting because they weren't trained properly. This is not my words. You can go ahead and look this. These are newspaper articles of these new DAs who he went around nationally and grabbed, but they don't know what they're doing, many of them, because lack of training.
So to the point of current state of the district attorney's office, I would like to talk about training. Can you talk about the training programs that you would like to see implemented and what you believe would be the benefit of better training? I'll start with you, Judge Dugan.
Well, so I imagine most of us are Eagles fans in here. Go Birds, all that good stuff. I'm a diehard, by the way, my whole life. But are we going to have a new draft choice come in and not show him the playbook, not teach that person how to run a reverse or how to do a blitz? That's what's occurred since 2018, sorry. It used to be a very robust training when the DAs came in. That since has stopped. Those new DAs, those first couple of years would come in and talk to us and say, back in the chambers, nobody showed me how to do that. It used to be they would have mentors and supervisors in the courtroom. Thomas Mandrakia, a DA who left, wrote an op-ed. It's in the paper. You could look at it. He left in disgust because he was going in, and no one was helping him. Again, we have the DA, the new DA, who would go into the bathroom and hide on the toilet seat, running from the judge because she didn't know what she was doing. Another went in the bathroom and was vomiting. Another very well respected, he was actually a pretty darn good DA, Chris Lynette, in the paper said, when you go back to the office, it was an echo chamber. The training that should happen is the senior DAs should be training, talking about experience. How do you handle this case? They should have easy access to the folks who've done it before. To me, it's just common sense. That's what I want. And yes, we should emphasize a little bit of the stuff that was talked about the compassion and the empathy. But these DAs were saying that's all they got were seminars about touchy-feely stuff instead of, wait a minute, I'm going to go in and it's a gun case. Our neighbors and our fellow citizens were shot. What are we supposed to do? And in so many cases, many of these assistant district attorneys do not contact the victim or the witnesses. Ask your neighbors about that. I'm not making this stuff up, folks.
Mr. Krasner?
All right, once again, a few facts, and actually maybe an answer that answers the question. Our training is longer. It is more in depth. We go all over the country. When you go all over the country, you hire the best and the brightest. And yes, I said the best and the brightest. I didn't say the most incompetent. I said the best and the brightest. And when you bring them back here, they need money. They need to be able to afford it. I want some people who maybe weren't born with a silver spoon. So we start paying them as lawyers right after Labor Day. They used to start this training when they passed the bar. We start them after Labor Day. They don't pass the bar until the middle of October. It is a longer training period. They're paid as lawyers even before they pass the bar. The training is intense, and it is intensive. These are incredibly talented people I'm dealing with, and honestly, I feel bad that they're being maligned by someone who is a judge in misdemeanor court. Misdemeanor court, that's what we're actually talking about. That's what you're getting. There's a reason I did not include Judge Dugan in our training, okay? But I did include other judges like Judge Karen Simmons. Why don't you talk to Judge Karen Simmons about Judge Dugan? Why don't you check in with her and see what she has to say? I really respect and like these young people. I think they're super talented. I think they're the future of this city in many ways. And it's a great American city, and we should bring them here. So I simply disagree that they're somehow a bunch of incompetent boobs. And even when we start hearing these statistics about, oh, there was the dismissal rate, you know what's missing there? When you successfully complete diversion, they dismiss your case. We're talking about it like it's a failure. It's not a failure to success when they successfully complete diversion and the case is dismissed. When they're exonerated, you know what we do? We dismiss their case. We're not going to retry them when they're innocent. And yet we're hearing these numbers being thrown at you in this way that frankly is misleading. I think you need a district attorney who's not going to mislead you.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
So we talked a lot about the leadership and training of DAs. I would like to talk more and focus on those defendants that come before you that you're involved with, more specifically how you're going to work with and continue to work with Black youth. Black youth are disproportionately funneled into the adult criminal justice system. When we talked earlier with our judges, everyone was on the same page that juveniles do not have a fully frontal, this is my words, not theirs, fully developed frontal lobe, which allows them to make to engage in proper decision making. That being said, what is your process for dealing with those juveniles that come in contact with the district attorney's office on the front end in terms of prevention, and then on the back end if they do come in front of you in terms of a crime or a misdemeanor? Thank you. We'll start with Judge Dugan.
All right, so just real quick, ask Judge Kirkland, ask Judge Pittman, ask Jimmy DeLeon, ask Lillian Ransom, ask Leon Tucker, ask Sheridan Harris, ask Vanessa Garrett-Hartley, Keir Gray, ask my staff over here about who I am. You're going to throw somebody's name with some innuendo out there. Juvenile justice. So what we're going to hear is that there are a ton of issues in juvenile justice, no doubt about it. Larry hired the best person in the world, Bob Listenby. He was Obama's main guy for this nationwide. So I ask, why isn't it better today? Why isn't it better? Why are there still problems if we had the national expert? We definitely need to sit down and talk more, talk to the community. But let me make this clear. These kids should be treated as children to start with. We need to figure out what has happened to them, how can we restore them, rehabilitate them. This is what I did as a judge in lowly municipal court. That's where the rubber meets the wall, the road. Hundreds of thousands of cases come through there. I ran Veterans Court. I was part of Dawn's Court, Mental Health Court, Drug Treatment Court. We save young black people, white people, people of all persuasions. I went into the prisons during COVID. I started COVID court because men and women were stuck in jail. The world stopped. I went in there with a mask, and I heard their cases to help them get them out of jail. I go to Graterford with young black men in my courtroom. We go to prison, and we talk to people like lifer Comar Glass, a big old man. He's blind. I give him a bear hug when we get in there. And we talk to these men these young men as mentors so they don't wind up in jail. I want to put mentor and diversion programs on steroids and cooperate, unlike the district attorney has cooperated in those programs.
Mr. Krasner?
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that the judge would like to put my programs on steroids. I think that's probably a good sign about those programs. The fact is that our diversion programs have greatly expanded in juvenile. They have doubled. We have a bright young man named Jordan King who has made this his cause, his specialty. He does a great job. I agree with the judge that Robert Listenby, my first assistant, who has spent his whole career on criminal justice, is now about 75, I think he's going on 76, is a tremendous asset. I brought him in, okay? And he's staying, at least if I'm in. That's how this is going to go. It is incredibly important that we work with juveniles. It is incredibly important that we work with young adults up to age 25. Why? Because it works. The U.S. Supreme Court recognizes you don't have full brain development till 25. So we started a thing called the Emerging Adult Unit that gives special types of training and therapy to young adults who are between 18 and 25. Job training, different kinds of therapy for addiction or for mental health issues, educational opportunities, educational loans. We are 100% in agreement, I think, the judge and I, that this should be a real emphasis and that we should be doing what we can for them. But that has maybe been one of the biggest emphases of our office since we got in, as is reflected by Listenby, as is reflected by the creation of an emerging adult unit that never existed, as is reflected by this vast expansion in juvenile diversion and juvenile programming. I also want to say, because I think it's fair and I think it's true, that I appreciate what the judge did in terms of a veterans court. I think it's very important. I appreciate the fact that he's been up to that for quite some time, and I support that. And even though he has resigned from the bench at this point, it's something that continues and that we take very seriously.
Thank you. So we talked about it briefly. I would like you to discuss your process and your procedures under your leadership in the district attorney's office about separating mental health from everything else. A lot of times we've said, especially in Harrisburg, it is said specifically that there are more people with mental health issues in the state correctional institutions than anything else. That being said, what is your position on helping those who come through the criminal justice system with mental health concerns, and how do you help them in the process? I will start with Mr. Krasner.
Thank you. We have a special mental health unit, which we consider to be very, very important. It is headed by a person who has a deep background in psychology and psychiatry. And it's true that what essentially happened is you had the rise of mass incarceration starting in the 1970s. In Pennsylvania, that meant the number of inmates increased 750%. Across the country, it increased 500%. How do you think they paid for it? They took down 85% of our mental health system. They eliminated it. And whenever they got rid of one of the older mental health facilities, they did not take the money to replace it. It became tax breaks for rich people. That's what happened. Or it became money to build new prisons. Our prisons should not be our mental health facilities, and there is an enormous representation of people suffering from major mental illness, both in county jail and also in state prison in Pennsylvania. So, you know, this is a problem we made, really. We didn't make the mental illness, but we made the elimination of treatment and turning police officers, you know, who are unfairly placed in the position of having to address it on the streets, and then turning correctional officers who are unfairly placed in the position of having to deal with it in custody as the way that we deal with it. It has to change fundamentally, but within the guardrails that we have right now, we put a lot of resources, a lot of time into trying to get to the root of mental health issues and trying to differentiate between activity that is frankly evil, criminal activity, and activity that is something that's fundamentally about mental health that we can address without people being harmed.
Well, in lowly municipal court, we have a national model for mental health. And I, as the president judge, I was president judge for 5 years, and I was voted president judge by 27 elected judges. So somebody thought I had some leadership skills, not just the Army as a squad leader and a paratrooper, but mental health court is one of our premier programs in municipal court. But I expanded that. I use that aspect in veterans court. We get people, we send people to get some help, to get assessed, to find out what your problems are. When I was part of the leadership in municipal court throughout the court system, I was one of the people who pushed to pay the people who do the mental health assessment, actually give them a better wage, because we had these doctors in the basement who would do these assessments, and they weren't getting paid much, so sometimes you get what you pay for. So we expanded their salary. I, Judge Pat Dugan, president judge, put a resource center in the basement so people could figure out how to get their benefits, but also mental health treatment. We opened it up for defendants could go down there on their own. We could order them down there, but you as a victim or a witness could go down there. A staff member could go down there. So I started that in the basement. Mental health is definitely a huge problem in our nation. And yes, the prisons are the biggest mental health institutes in the country. We need to have more assets for these folks. I'm talking about on the street, when they're in custody, when they're out of custody, because in my courtroom, when I would send somebody for treatment and they were on their meds, they were a completely different person. So yes, sometimes the courts would say, you better go get your meds, and they would do it. And that was the compassion back and forth, the tough love. We do this in a program called Alternative Misdemeanor Program. It was a fantastic program. The DA kind of pulled support out of there. He really did. He didn't believe in it much. I'm sorry, I can keep going.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Krasner, did you respond on this question?
I did.
Okay, I thought you did. Okay. Moving on, many victims of violence, especially in marginalized communities, do not feel safe because they distrust the justice system. How do you go about building trust in the system for those victims? Yes, Judge Dugan, thank you.
Again, that's system-wide, systemic. Obviously, the system has been racist for a couple centuries, so to make that sea change is very difficult. Obviously, training, the first point of contact are the police officers, but then when they get into the system, it's those in the corrections and those in the courts, which we've tried to make our people. We send them to a ton of training to make sure they're cognizant of who's in front of them, treat everybody with respect. There was a victim's advocate who was in my courtroom. I was in homicide for years in lowly municipal court. Prelims, by the way. This woman, when she heard I was running, was excited because she saw how I treated everybody with compassion, including the defendants. But when it comes to the district attorney's office, it starts with contacting the victims and the witnesses and staying in touch with them. Too many times, the witness is not contacted, like the one I was talking about in federal court. Remember the officer Wilson who was killed in the GameStop? Mm-hmm. So there was some sort of appeal going on, and that's fine, have the appeals. But do you know that the other victim in that case was not notified for that hearing? That was the other officer on scene. He was actually, there was aggravated assault against him in that horrendous shooting. Shouldn't we even if it's a police officer, notify that victim that he should come to court when I'm asking to overturn a death penalty. Whether you believe it in it or not, that victim should be there. If your children, your grandchildren are murdered, don't you think you have the right to be notified that there's a hearing and you read about it in the paper? That's just such lack of compassion and empathy. Can we start with that for the victims? Can we do that? Time and time again, victims are not notified about hearings. That's something if I'm the DA. I mean, I met a couple ladies who lost their kids, and I gave them a hug. And they were like, I didn't get any of that from the DA's office. At a minimum, a hug?
My. All right. So actually, we went from 29 victim services workers to 58. We doubled them. These stories about, it wasn't Officer Wilson, it was Sergeant Wilson, are skipping the fact that I sat in the home of Sergeant Wilson's people with the person you're talking about, who we supposedly didn't notify for 2+ hours, talking about the case and their feelings about the case and what we should do. And I did it again with it was the grandmother and the sister of Sergeant Wilson in the office to hear what it is they had to say. You know, we can keep coming with sort of creative, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And no office is perfect. I'll be the first to concede that. But this is just not real. I have spent more time than any prior DA sitting in rooms with the mothers of people who were killed to hear exactly what it is that they want to know. It is hard sometimes to get a hold of victims. You're sometimes talking to survivors or victims 25 years later. They cannot be located. Even the one that, you know, Judge Goldberg, a Republican who worked in the DA's office in the bad old days, was criticizing us about. That was a case where we did contact a family member who was clergy, and he asked us not to contact the other family members because he said he would do it. Our victim services advocate made a mistake. She should have said, I don't care what you say, Reverend, I'm going to do it anyway. But he said it would be so painful for the family members that we shouldn't do it. He would. And then he failed. You know, are you hearing the version of this that is being given to you? Is this the kind of storyteller who's telling you the truth? Or is this someone who is basically putting ambition ahead of fact, his own career advancement ahead of reality? We cannot have another DA. We had it with Lynn Abraham. We had it with Seth Williams, who is more wedded to their own career and their own advancement than they are to the truth. I'm perfectly happy to tell the truth all day long, including the truth about Judge Dugan doing a good thing with Veterans Court. Whatever he did with Mental Health Court, I applaud that. That's a good thing for him to do, right? But can we just live in a world where you have a prosecutor who's not going to make his own career more important than telling you the truth about what's actually going on, is not going to make winning a case more important, or is maybe not going to make finding somebody not guilty who should have been found guilty more important? I think integrity is the root of it. And one of the things we have achieved with the exonerations, in which we've only had 3 out of the 45+, where we've taken a stand where judges did not agree, only 3, okay? Can we just try to have a system where people believe that the DA, imperfect though he or she may be, is trying to be fair and trying every day to be fair and would rather do the right thing than win an election? Can we just have that?
So I want to get into, as we start to close and wrap up, I would like to get into the criticisms of you, both of you as candidates. The first one is directed towards Mr. Krasner. Mr. Krasner, your tenure has been marked by progressive reforms, but critics argue that these policies have increased violence and DAs, quote unquote, dropping the ball. More specifically, people have stated the concern about the Macy's shooting, or stabbing, that occurred, stating that the increase in violence has caused stores to leave downtown. Their policies about retail theft have also caused businesses to go under because of them. And then also there's been a conversation about a case in 2021 where an ex-husband was charged in the murder of his ex-wife, and he was brought in front of the court prior to on an assault of the ex-wife. But unfortunately, he was given probation instead of being incarcerated, and had the DA actually looked at the file, would have known that this person was violent and should have been put away. The gentleman then turned around and shot his ex-wife in the head. in Fox Chase in 2021. So the question is, when is being progressive too much, and how do you deal with this?
Is this a 2-minute?
I'll give you 3.
3, thank you.
And I'll give Judge Dugan also 3.
That sounds fair. Okay, number one, Macy's closed stores in 150 states. And the case that you're talking about, which is a horrific case in which we just achieved a conviction, is one in which a severely mentally ill man who was stealing a hat was chased out of the store. Store security did not call police. He came back in, and then he stabbed 2 men in there, killed one of them, harmed the other one pretty severely. It was not reported to the police, okay? Okay, I mean, I think that's a tragedy. I think it's awful. I wish it never happened. We prosecuted it vigorously. He got a ton of time. He probably will die in jail. That's the reality. It wasn't reported to police. I'm not sure how that is something that we caused. We're not the police. We don't even see a case until there is an arrest. Wawa, you're going to hear all about this one. The Philadelphia Inquirer did an in-depth review of what's going on with Wawa. The only stores they closed were unprofitable. They were unprofitable. They had relatively low levels of crime reported, but they weren't making money. The stores that had very high levels of crime reported were profitable. They kept them open. This is reality. Like, we can live in this sort of false narrative, or we can tell the truth here. You also spoke about the situation, and it is one of the awful things we deal with, the domestic violence situation in which there was a man who was victimizing his partner. He did it a number of times, and tragically, he ended up killing her. What was actually going on there was he had pending warrants. In other words, she had come in and she had spoken to different detectives in this situation. For whatever reason, they were different detectives, and there were warrants out there for him that hadn't been served for something like more than 30 days. And unfortunately, she killed him. You know, whatever happened there, the whole system let her down. But we don't serve warrants. That's not what we do. We don't carry a badge and a gun. That's not what we do. Let's talk about real issues. There was nothing progressive or not progressive happening there. There was a gap. And it led to my speaking to the police commissioner at the time and saying, with domestic violence cases, could we always get it to the same detective? Because at least that detective will see there's a pattern developing here. He keeps coming back, and they'll make it a higher priority to go get him. That's not what occurred in that case. 3 different detectives apparently thought they were just dealing with independent issues, and so they didn't see the urgency there. It's something that we all need to work on together, because I think it is important. Too progressive, not progressive, I mean, here's the facts. Look at the Philadelphia Police Department's publicly available data. We not only had a record low year last year, but for 4 straight years, we have outdone the average of big cities in improving public safety. Last year, the newspaper reporting was that Philadelphia led the nation in terms of big cities. And no, it's not just last year. This goes back 4 years. We led the nation in terms of these enormous reductions in homicide and gun violence. And guess what? It's even better this year. Right now, on this date, we have the 2nd lowest level of homicides in the last 50 years, the 2nd lowest. So I don't know how we turn massive victory in improving public safety into somehow using modern techniques fails. I call victory, victory. I think we should call success, success, and keep working hard to make it even more successful.
Thank you, Mr. Krasner. I do want to clarify that one of the criticisms about the case in 2021 is that the DA was inexperienced, and that's why the failure happened.
May I answer that?
Please.
The DA didn't have a badge and a gun. It was not the DA's job to arrest that man, nor did that DA have a database of open bench warrants. That's something that the police have. That is a narrative that serves some people's purpose, but it's not the truth.
Thank you. Judge Dugan, so we're focusing on criticisms. So
Okay.
one of the conversations, you have received multiple endorsements from influential labor unions such as the Building and Construction Trades Council. The conversation is that you are more or less going to work directly for them and not for the people. Can you clarify that?
I sure can. So I was on the bench, and Mr. Krasner and Mr. Hetznegger were in front of me. I think it was maybe 2010. And I don't know if you remember, during the casinos that were being built on Delaware Avenue, there were a lot of demonstrations. People would just lay down, wouldn't let the construction trucks get onto the site. So these folks were arrested. Mr. Krasner, Mr. Hetznegger, to find defense attorneys, civil rights attorneys. They represented them. Guess what the judge did? Found them not guilty. Oh, wait a minute. When I ran for judge, guess who supported me? The building trades. Guess who probably wanted those people to be punished? I don't know if they did or not, because I'm not for sale. So as a judge, I pretty much found against the building trades, and I found those people not guilty. So I'm not for sale. So those who are going to say that, they're wrong. I'm sorry, but some of my family have been union members. My father was operating engineers. He would have been a better uncle than a father, by the way. But so I had a brother. So we all have. Listen, I was saying my father was an operating engineer, but he wasn't a very good father. So I didn't want to. I have that story out there. I was basically raised by a single mother. My brother was with the automobile union. My grandmother was a teamster at Girard College. She cleaned tables. My grandfather drove trucks for 107, a union. My point is, unions are part of me. So when I ran the first time, I got union support. I'm proud of it, but I'm not for sale. And I proved it as an early judge when I found against the best interests of the building trades in 2010. It's in the paper, and Mr. Krasner, Mr. Hetznegger, you should see the glowing endorsement they gave me in the paper. I also started the eviction diversion court. I was the president judge. $300 million came to the landlords. 46,000 of our neighbors, 46,000 Philadelphian families were not evicted because Judge Dugan's leadership. I had a great team that basically did it. Helen Ginn has a great line in a newspaper contemporaneously about the leadership of Judge Dugan. Again, I'm this old paratrooper, but I'm not Trumponian, which he likes to call me. I'm not Nixonian. I'm a die-hard Democrat who believes in second chances, and I've done it. I'm not making this up. All the sources, all the stuff I was talking about either came from a docket or from a newspaper article. And you know what? I probably should check the newspaper articles a little better, because sometimes there's fake news like has been coming out of that office for 7 years.
So to conclude, I would like for you both to provide a closing statement for 3 minutes. But in that conversation, if you can talk about prosecutorial discretion, diversion, and what diversion actually is, because it seems that that's something that people need to understand. Okay. Mr. Krasner.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. I hope you won't consider the conversation over, because I'm more than happy to speak further and in more detail. Diversion is a form of accountability, the point of which is to make you do a lot of stuff and then we do not convict you. Why? Because when you convict people, and some of them need to be convicted, when we convict people, it often means they can't participate in the economy anymore. So if you have a minor offense and someone who's not fundamentally criminal in nature, it's a pretty good idea. Also, a lot of times diversion is a lot more work. There's a lot more treatment involved, education involved, other steps that you have to take to get the stuff right. But it's incentivized with the idea that we're not going to stop you from being able to get housing, get educational loans, get your education, get a good job, become a provider, own a home, form a family. That's the notion, and I think we both support it. I think that that's a fair statement, that we both support diversion. It has been a particular emphasis of my office, and frankly, I'm happy to see that the police department has also embraced it, in particular Commissioner Bethel, with whom I get along extremely well. It has been embraced. Some of this discussion you heard about how the accelerated misdemeanor diversion program is reduced. I believe in it 100%. I've always believed in it 100%. But what's actually happened in the city is that the police believe in it too. So what they started to do was divert people before they were ever arrested, okay? When you divert people under a police program before they're ever arrested, they're not in court. When they're not in court, they don't go to the accelerated misdemeanor program because they're being diverted in a different way. That's what's actually going on there. So that is the nature of diversion. In some of our diversion programs, we have seen much, much better public safety results. I'll just give you an example. We took people who are basically not criminal, but they were illegally possessing guns, meaning they didn't have a record. They bought the gun the right way, but they didn't get the right paperwork to carry it for some reason. They're not members of gangs. They're not up to shifty stuff. They're just going to work, and they had it, and we put them through an intensive diversion program. And then we compared them to people who got convicted under the same circumstances. The rate at which you get a rearrest out of diversion is only 1. The rate at which you get a rearrest after conviction is 4. Anytime I can stop 3 new arrests for illegal behavior and make the public safer, I want to do that. So I do believe in the power of diversion. Obviously, you have to be very, very careful about it. There's a lot of discretion involved. It is ultimately up to the DA in many instances, not all, to decide who goes into diversion. So we're really active, not just about trying things that are carefully innovative, but testing them. And when we see something's off, maybe a program's too short, needs to be longer, we'll change it. Or maybe we're letting in some cases that shouldn't be in here. We'll change that program. You know, the whole point is to make people safer. We don't do diversion to be softies. We do diversion to make the public safer. And I'm actually very proud of the results that we have seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Krasner. Judge Dugan.
Must be an election year, because meeting after meeting when I was the president judge, time after time coming out of the district attorney's office was they didn't want the courts to control it, because if you put somebody in a diversion program, it's a partnership between the DA, the public defender, and all these Department of Behavioral Health and whatnot. So we work as a team to work on the men and women, the citizens of Philadelphia who come in front of us. And I'm telling you, time after time, the district attorney's office did not want to give up that control to the courts. The police assistant diversion program is a great program in theory. The numbers are pretty low, and there's no way of knowing whether when you drop somebody off to therapy or treatment, they go in the front door, do they go out the back door? That's what we hear. In AMP court, Alternative Misdemeanor Program, a diversion court, we have nurses, mental health specialists, community activists in the courtroom, people who help with community service. Some of the people that come through the court have actually found jobs. We send them for job treatment. We send them for substance abuse treatment. That's what we do in those diversion courts when it's the judge who's in charge in partnership with everybody. But that partnership really is a very difficult time. It has been. I think maybe it's gotten a little better because it's an election year, but prior to that, it really wasn't. I'm going to play well in the sandbox. Look at the mayor's budget address the other day. Go back and look at it. Did she even mention partnership with Larry? She mentioned it, a partnership with everybody else. She praised Chief Commissioner Bethel. Go back and look at what the omission of a very important office. So I will work with her and Commissioner Bethel. At a recent forum that we had, Larry disparaged the mayor's director of public safety, that office. Basically said, I don't work for the mayor. Well, I don't work for the mayor, but we can work together. I mean, frankly, it's the commissioners and the mayor's strategy that is helping us with these numbers that have come down. One correction, I think I heard him say the assistant district attorney doesn't have access to what bench warrants are out there. Wow, I'm pretty sure they do. Wow, that's something, if I was the PJ, I would change that. Police with retail thefts. Yes, the store has to call the police, right? The police stopped coming for retail theft because when they would arrest, they wouldn't be charged. So they stopped wasting their time. This is not I'm not making this up. We have 22,000 retail thefts. The arrest rate was 2%. Before he was in, it was 7,000 with a 23% arrest rate. The police stopped coming because of the policies that he implemented. Are we going to have anything else to say? Thank you for coming out and spending all day to hear. Is Cassandra still here? She wanted my tie. I was going to give it to her. You have questions from the audience too? I'm sorry.
So unfortunately, we do not have time for questions from the audience, but we would like to thank you both, Judge Dugan, Mr. Krasner, for attending. Your commentary has been very helpful, very insightful. And again, thank you to we have closing remarks from the president. Thank you. Sir, 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 no, sir.
So we want to thank you for coming out, sir. All righty. Thank you, Pastor Moore. All right, 1 second. All right, so we're so sorry for the interruption, everyone, but we want to say thank you to our DA candidates for being here. On behalf of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Pennsylvania chapter, I want to sincerely thank you all for joining us today for today's critical conversation. This forum was about more than just hearing from candidates. It was about ensuring our community is informed, engaged, and ready to take action at the ballot box. We are especially grateful to our partner organizations, the National Council of Negro Women, NCNW, the Philadelphia and Delaware Valley sections, as well as Mount Carmel Baptist Church, and the incredible pastor, Donald D. Moore, who's in the back. Give him a hand. Yes. We want to thank them for their collaboration and commitment to civic engagement. It is through strong partnerships like these that we continue to amplify our collective voices and advocate for meaningful change. A special thank you to our outstanding moderator, Attorney Courtney Richardson, President of the Barristers Association of Philadelphia. I don't know where Courtney went. Oh, okay, Courtney, okay. Thank you, Courtney, for leading today's discussion with your skill and precision. Your expertise brought depth and insight to the conversation and ensuring that we had a meaningful and engaging dialogue. To our candidates, thank you for your time, your insights, and your dedication to public service. These positions you seek carry immense responsibility, and we appreciate your willingness to engage directly with the community, answer tough questions, and share your vision for your future of our justice system. And to our audience, whether you're here in person or joining us virtually, we thank you for showing up, for listening, and for committing to being informed voters. An engaged community is a powerful community, and your participation today is a testament to the strength we hold when we come together. As we move forward, let's take what we learned today and turn it into action. Share this knowledge, encourage others to vote, and most importantly, show up at the polls. The decisions made in this election will have lasting impacts, and every vote truly matters. The National Coalition of 100 Black Women will continue to stand at the forefront of advocacy, ensuring that our voices of Black women and girls are heard and that justice and equity remain at the center of our work. We want to thank you again for a great discussion. We want to thank everyone for attending this candidates forum. Please stay tuned for additional programming from both our partner organizations as well as our organization. Thank you again for coming out. And please, 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 we will see you at the polls in May.